The morning fog rolled off Coronado Beach like a gray blanket, thick enough to hide the Pacific Ocean just yards away. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the Naval Special Warfare Training Compound, her sea bag slung over one shoulder, watching through the chain-link fence as dozens of men in green uniforms ran in perfect formation along the sand. Their boots hit the ground in unison, creating a rhythm that seemed to shake the very air around them. She checked her watch. 0530. In exactly 30 minutes, she would walk through those gates and begin the most challenging military training program in the world. Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. Bud S. The place where dreams came to die and legends were born. Sarah had dreamed of this moment since she was 12 years old. Watching a documentary about Navy SEALs with her father in their cramped apartment in San Francisco's Chinatown. While other girls her age were collecting posters of boy bands, she was studying military tactics and memorizing the SEAL Creed. Her father, a former Marine who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, never discouraged her unusual interests. Instead, he drove her to the local pool at 5 every morning before school so she could swim laps until her lungs burned and her arms felt like concrete. Now, at 26, she stood 5 feet 6 inches tall with the lean, muscular build of a competitive swimmer. Her black hair was pulled back in the regulation bun, and her dark eyes held a determination that had carried her through 4 years at the Naval Academy, 2 deployments as a surface warfare officer, and 18 months of preparation for this exact moment. She had given up everything for this chance: a comfortable career path, a relationship with a fellow officer who couldn't understand her obsession with joining the teams, even the approval of some family members who thought she was throwing away a promising future for an impossible dream. But Sarah had never been interested in the possible. She had always been drawn to the impossible. The guard at the gate barely looked up when she presented her orders. He was probably used to seeing eager young officers show up for Bud S., full of confidence and determination. What he wasn't used to seeing was a woman. Sarah was only the 3rd female officer to attempt SEAL training since the program opened to women 2 years earlier. The first had dropped out during Hell Week after suffering a stress fracture. The second had made it to week 12 before a shoulder injury ended her hopes. Both had been exceptional athletes with impressive military records. Both had been sent home with their heads held high and their dreams in pieces. Sarah intended to be different. She followed the directions to the Bud's compound, her boots clicking against the asphalt with each step. Other candidates were arriving too, mostly young men in their early 20s with the lean, hungry look of athletes. They carried themselves with the confidence of people who had never failed at anything physical in their lives. High school football captains, college wrestlers, marathon runners, men who had dominated every athletic challenge they had ever faced and expected to continue that trend. They noticed her immediately, of course. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as she walked past. Some stared openly, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to something that looked like amusement. She heard whispers behind her, fragments of conversation that followed her like shadows. Is that really a woman? Thought they gave up on that experiment. Wonder how long she'll last. My money's on week 2, tops. Sarah kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral. She had expected this reaction, had prepared for it during months of additional training that pushed her body beyond what she thought possible. Every morning at 4 a.m. she was in the gym. Every afternoon she was in the pool. Every weekend she was running mountains or practicing with heavy packs until her feet bled through her boots. She had made herself as physically ready as any human being could be. But as she looked around at her fellow candidates, she realized that physical readiness might not be enough. The men around her weren't just fit, they were specimens. 6-foot-tall frames packed with muscle that looked like it had been sculpted from granite. Arms that could probably bench press twice their body weight. legs that could run forever without breaking stride. They moved with the casual confidence of people who had never doubted their physical capabilities because they had never had reason to. Sarah was strong, but she wasn't built like these men. She was fast, but probably not faster than the best of them. She could swim like a fish and run like the wind, but so could they. Her advantage, if she had one at all, would have to come from somewhere else. From the place inside her that refused to quit even when quitting was the smart choice. From the voice in her head that whispered, "One more," when her body screamed for mercy. The briefing room was a stark, windowless space with fluorescent lights that cast everything in harsh shadows. 52 candidates filed in and took seats on metal folding chairs arranged in perfect rows. Sarah chose a seat in the middle, not wanting to draw attention by sitting too far forward or too far back. The whispers and sideways glances continued, but she ignored them, focusing instead on the American flag hanging at the front of the room and the sealed trident mounted beside it. At exactly 0600 hours, the door burst open and Senior Chief Petty Officer Mike Rodriguez strode in. He was a compact man, maybe 5'9", with arms that looked like they could crush steel and eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing perfect, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had earned respect through blood, sweat, and countless missions in places most people couldn't pronounce. "Good morning, tadpoles," he said, his gaze sweeping across the room like a searchlight. "Welcome to Bud S. For the next 24 weeks, assuming you last that long, this place will be your home, your school, your church, and your hell. Some of you think you know what you're getting into. Some of you think you're ready. Some of you think you're special." His eyes found Sarah for just a moment, and she felt the weight of his assessment like a physical thing. "You're wrong on all counts. What you think you know about being tough, about being strong, about being ready? Forget it. We're going to break you down to nothing and then see if there's anything worth building back up. Most of you won't make it past week 3. That's not an insult. That's just math. We've been doing this for 70 years and the numbers don't lie." He began walking between the rows of chairs, his boots making sharp sounds against the concrete floor. Every candidate sat a little straighter as he passed. "You want to know what we're looking for? It's not the biggest guy. It's not the fastest swimmer. It's not the one with the most impressive college degree or the fanciest recommendation letters. We're looking for the person who refuses to quit when quitting is the only logical choice. We're looking for someone who can function when their body is broken, their mind is fried, and their spirit is crushed. We're looking for someone who can carry their teammate when they can barely carry themselves." He stopped directly in front of Sarah's row, close enough that she could see the network of scars on his forearms and the faded tattoo on his wrist that marked him as a member of SEAL Team 6. "Some of you are here to prove something to your daddy. Some of you are here because you watched too many movies and think this looks cool. Some of you are here because you want to be part of something bigger than yourselves. I don't care why you're here. I only care about one thing. When the pain starts, and it will start today, will you ring the bell or will you keep moving forward?" The bell. Every candidate knew about the bell. It sat on a post outside the main training building, shining brass that had been polished by the hands of hundreds of men who had decided they'd had enough. 3 rings of that bell, and a candidate's ordeal was over. "No shame in it," the instructors always said. "Just pack your bags and go back to the regular Navy with your head held high." Most candidates heard that speech and nodded along, thinking they understood. Sarah heard it and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She knew with absolute certainty that she would die before she rang that bell. "Your first evolution starts in 15 minutes, Rodriguez continued. "Physical screening test. You've all passed it before or you wouldn't be here. But that was before you had 51 other candidates to compete against. That was before you had instructors watching your every move, looking for any sign of weakness. That was before the real pressure started." He walked to the front of the room and turned to face them all. The PST consists of 500-yard swim, maximum push-ups in 2 minutes, maximum sit-ups in 2 minutes, maximum pull-ups with no time limit, and a 1.5-mile run. You know the minimum standards. 12:30 swim time, 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, 10 pull-ups, 10:30 run time. Those are the numbers that will keep you from getting dropped immediately. But here's what they don't tell you in the brochures. Minimum standards are for minimum people. We don't train minimum people. We train the best of the best. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly. She had consistently beaten all the minimum standards by wide margins during her preparation. But Rodriguez was right about one thing. This was different. This wasn't training alone in a pool or on a track where the only person judging her performance was herself. This was competition. This was pressure. This was 51 other candidates who were probably just as prepared as she was and who had been watching her since she walked through the gate. "One more thing," Rodriguez said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Some of you might be wondering about the female candidate in your class. Let me make something clear. There are no special standards here. There is no easier path. There are no participation trophies. The ocean doesn't care about your gender. The enemy doesn't care about your gender. Your teammates don't care about your gender. They care about one thing. Can you do the job when lives are on the line?" Every head in the room turned toward Sarah. She felt the weight of their stares but kept her eyes fixed on Rodriguez, her expression calm and attentive. Inside, her mind was racing. He was drawing attention to her, marking her as different, making her a target for extra scrutiny. Whether that was intentional psychological pressure or just blunt honesty, she couldn't tell. Maybe both. "Gentlemen and lady," Rodriguez continued, "you have 10 minutes to change into PT gear and get to the beach. Move." The room erupted in motion as 52 candidates rushed for the door. Sarah moved with them, but not frantically. She had learned long ago that panic was the enemy of performance. She would move quickly but efficiently, saving her energy for the challenges ahead. The locker room was a study in controlled chaos. Men stripping out of uniforms and pulling on swim trunks, t-shirts, and running shoes. The conversation was subdued now, everyone focused on the task ahead. Sarah changed quickly in a separate area, pulling on her one-piece swimsuit, shorts, and the same type of white t-shirt as everyone else. When she emerged, several candidates glanced in her direction, but the looks were different now. Less curious, more appraising. They were starting to see her as competition rather than novelty. The beach was a stretch of sand that looked deceptively peaceful in the morning light. The Pacific Ocean rolled gently against the shore, and seagulls called overhead as they searched for breakfast. It was the kind of scene that belonged on a postcard. Not in a military training facility designed to push human beings to their breaking point. But Sarah knew better than to be fooled by appearances. She had studied every piece of footage, every photograph, every account of Bud-S training she could find. This beach had seen more pain and suffering than most battlefields. It had witnessed the destruction of dreams and the forging of legends. It had been soaked with the sweat, blood, and tears of thousands of men who had come here believing they were ready for anything. Now, it was her turn to find out what she was really made of. The candidates formed up in a loose formation near the water's edge. Rodriguez and 3 other instructors took positions where they could observe the entire group. Each instructor carried a clipboard and wore the kind of expression that suggested they were not impressed by anything they saw. "Candidates, you will complete this evolution in the order I call your names," Rodriguez announced. "When I call your name, you will enter the water and swim 500 yards using any stroke you choose. You will touch the buoy at the halfway point and return to shore. Your time starts when your feet leave the sand and stops when your feet touch the sand on your return. Any questions?" No one raised their hand. This wasn't the time for questions. "Anderson!" A tall candidate with the build of a college swimmer jogged into the water and began a strong freestyle stroke. Sarah watched him pull away from shore with smooth, efficient movements that suggested years of competitive training. His technique was flawless, his pace steady. She estimated he would finish well under the 11-minute mark that most SEAL candidates targeted. "Chen!" Sarah's heart jumped, but her body responded automatically. She had practiced this transition thousands of times. She jogged into the water, feeling the cold Pacific surge around her ankles, then her knees, then her waist. When the water reached chest depth, she dove forward and began her stroke. The water was colder than she had expected, but she adjusted quickly. Cold water had been part of her training regimen for months. She settled into the rhythm she had practiced endlessly, long, powerful strokes that maximized distance while conserving energy. Her breathing was controlled, her body position optimal. She could feel the current and adjusted her angle to compensate, using the ocean's movement to her advantage rather than fighting against it. Behind her, she could hear Rodriguez calling more names, but she blocked out the distraction. There was only the water, the buoy ahead of her, and the rhythm of her stroke. She reached the halfway point in just over 5 minutes and made her turn efficiently, barely losing momentum. The return trip felt longer, as return trips always did, but her pace remained steady. Her shoulders began to burn slightly as lactic acid built up in her muscles, but she had experienced far worse during training. This was manageable. This was what she had prepared for. She could see the shore approaching and increased her stroke rate slightly for the final push. Her feet touched sand at exactly 9 minutes and 43 seconds. According to the stopwatch, Rodriguez held up as she emerged from the water. It was a strong time, better than she had hoped for, and well ahead of most candidates. But as she looked around at the instructors' faces, she saw no sign of approval. Rodriguez made a mark on his clipboard and called the next name without comment. She had learned her first lesson. Impressive performances were expected here, not celebrated. The push-ups came next. 252 candidates spread out on the sand, each trying to find a spot that was relatively level and free of rocks. Sarah took her position and waited for the command, her mind already shifting into the zone she had cultivated through thousands of hours of training. "Begin!" She dropped into the first push-up, her body forming a perfect plank from head to heels. Her chest touched the sand briefly before she pressed back up to the starting position. 1. Her form was textbook perfect, each repetition identical to the last. She had practiced this evolution until her technique was automatic, until she could maintain proper form even when her muscles were screaming for relief. Around her, she could hear the sounds of 51 other candidates doing the same thing, controlled breathing, bodies moving up and down in rhythm, the occasional grunt of effort as someone pushed through fatigue. But she blocked it all out, focusing solely on her own performance. At the 1-minute mark, she had completed 48 push-ups and was feeling strong. Her shoulders and chest were working hard, but she was nowhere near failure. The pace she had set was sustainable, and she had plenty left in reserve for the final push. At 90 seconds, she reached 68 push-ups and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She was ahead of her planned pace and still felt controlled. Around her, she could hear some candidates beginning to struggle. Their breathing was becoming labored, their form starting to break down as fatigue set in. The final 30 seconds were always the hardest. This was where preparation met willpower, where months of training either paid off or proved insufficient. Sarah's muscles were burning now, each push-up requiring conscious effort to maintain proper form. But she had been here before in training, had pushed through this wall hundreds of times. She knew she could do it again. "Time!" Sarah held the up position and waited for Rodriguez's count. 87 push-ups. It was a strong performance, well above the minimum and competitive with any candidate in the class. More importantly, she had maintained perfect form throughout, giving the instructors no reason to discount any of her repetitions. The sit-ups and pull-ups followed in rapid succession. Sarah's core had always been one of her strongest assets, and she powered through 96 sit-ups with the same methodical precision she had shown in the push-ups. The pull-ups were more challenging, as they were for most candidates, but she managed 18 clean repetitions before her grip finally gave out. Then came the run. The 1.5-mile course took candidates off the beach and through the streets of Coronado, past neat rows of military housing and perfectly maintained lawns. It was a route Sarah had studied on maps and satellite images, memorizing every turn and elevation change. She knew where the hills were, where the course turned back toward the ocean, where she would need to dig deep, and where she might be able to recover slightly. But knowing a course and running it under pressure were two different things. Rodriguez raised his arm and looked at his stopwatch. Go! 52 candidates surged forward like thoroughbreds leaving the starting gate. The beach sand made the first 100 yards challenging, but Sarah had trained for this, had spent hours running in sand until her calves felt like they were going to explode. She settled into the pack, not trying to lead, but not content to follow either. This was about hitting her goal time, not about beating everyone else. The pace felt fast but manageable. Her breathing was controlled, her form efficient. She had practiced this exact distance so many times that her body knew precisely what to expect at each stage of the race. At the half-mile mark, she would start to feel the first hints of fatigue. At 1 mile, her legs would begin to burn. At the final quarter mile, she would need to call on every ounce of mental toughness she possessed. Everything went according to plan until the 3/4 mile mark. That's when she heard the footsteps behind her getting closer, accompanied by heavy breathing and what sounded like whispered comments. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone was using her as motivation, drawing energy from the idea of beating the female candidate. Sarah had expected this, had trained for it, mentally if not physically. She knew that some candidates would see her as a target, would push themselves harder just for the satisfaction of finishing ahead of her. She had prepared herself to be used as a measuring stick, to have her every performance scrutinized and compared. What she hadn't prepared for was how it would feel. The footsteps grew closer, and she could hear fragments of conversation now. Not gonna get beat by a girl. Come on, pick it up. She's slowing down. Sarah checked her pace and realized they were right. She was slowing down, not because she was tired, but because she was thinking too much. She was running with her head instead of her legs, calculating and analyzing instead of just running. She had fallen into the trap of racing against other people instead of racing against the clock. She made a decision that would define the rest of her BUD/S experience. Instead of trying to match the pace of the candidates around her, instead of letting their presence dictate her performance, she blocked them out completely. She found her rhythm, the pace that her months of training had programmed into her body, and trusted it completely. If that pace was good enough to hit her target time, then it was good enough. If it wasn't, then she would accept the consequences. The candidates who had been using her as motivation pulled ahead, their footsteps fading as they increased their pace. Sarah let them go. This wasn't about them. This had never been about them. This was about her preparation, and her ability to execute under pressure. The final quarter mile was every bit as difficult as she had expected. Her legs felt heavy, her lungs burned with each breath. And her pace wanted to slow with every step. But she had been here before in training, had pushed through this exact feeling dozens of times. She knew her body could handle it. More importantly, she knew her mind could handle it. She rounded the final corner and could see the finish line ahead. Rodriguez and the other instructors were waiting, stopwatches in hand, clipboards ready. Several candidates were already there, bent over with their hands on their knees, fighting to catch their breath. Sarah could see the times being recorded, could see that several candidates had finished well under 10 minutes. She crossed the finish line at 10 minutes and 18 seconds. It was a respectable time, well within the standards expected of SEAL candidates. But as she walked slowly in circles, letting her heart rate return to normal, she found herself analyzing every aspect of her performance. The swim had been strong. The calisthenics had been solid. The run had been adequate, but not impressive. For the first time since arriving at Bud S, she allowed herself to wonder if adequate would be enough. Rodriguez finished recording times and called the candidates into formation. The morning fog had burned off completely now, and the California sun was beginning to heat the sand beneath their feet. Sarah could feel sweat evaporating from her skin, leaving behind a thin layer of salt that would be her constant companion for the next 6 months. "Congratulations," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying no trace of actual congratulation. "You've all survived your first evolution. Some of you exceeded expectations. Some of you met them. Some of you gave us reasons to watch you more closely going forward." His eyes found Sarah again, but this time she was ready for the attention. She met his gaze directly, her expression calm and confident. She had nothing to be ashamed of. Her performance had been solid across all events. She belonged here as much as anyone else. "Your next evolution begins in 30 minutes, Rodriguez continued. "Log PT. You'll work in boat crews of 7. Crew assignments are posted on the board. Find your crew, find your log, and prepare to discover what teamwork really means." As the formation broke up and candidates rushed toward the assignment board, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The individual evolutions were over now. From this point forward, everything would be done as part of a team. Her success or failure would be tied to 6 other people, just as theirs would be tied to her. She found her name on the roster, Boat Crew 7. The other names were unfamiliar, but that wasn't surprising. She hadn't had time to learn everyone's names yet, and the candidates who had been friendly during in-processing had kept their distance once the competition began. One by one, her new teammates gathered around the board. Williams, a stocky African-American candidate from Alabama with arms like tree trunks. Martinez, a wiry Hispanic candidate from Texas who looked like he could run all day without breaking a sweat. Johnson, a tall blonde candidate from Minnesota who had the lean build of a distance runner. Peterson, another tall candidate, this one from California, with the kind of tan that suggested he spent most of his free time on the beach. Roberts, a medium-built candidate from North Carolina whose quiet demeanor suggested hidden depths. And Thompson. Thompson was the candidate who had been running behind her during the final mile, one of the voices she had heard pushing to beat the female candidate. He was average height, but powerfully built, with the kind of thick neck and broad shoulders that suggested a wrestling background. When he saw her name on the crew roster, his expression shifted from neutral to something that looked like resignation mixed with annoyance. "Great," he muttered, loud enough for the others to hear. "Looks like we got the diversity hire." The comment hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. The other crew members exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to embarrassed. Sarah felt her face flush slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "I'm Chen," she said, extending her hand to Thompson. "Looking forward to working with you." Thompson looked at her hand for a long moment before shaking it briefly. His grip was firm to the point of being painful, and he held eye contact longer than necessary, as if trying to establish dominance through a handshake. "Thompson," he said, "just try to keep up." Sarah smiled, an expression that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll do my best." She had dealt with men like Thompson before, men who saw her presence as a personal affront, who interpreted her ambition as an attack on their own masculinity. Men who would work twice as hard to prove that she didn't belong, who would use her every mistake as evidence that women weren't cut out for elite military units. She had learned to handle such men by outworking them, by being so prepared and so competent that they couldn't deny her abilities even if they wanted to. but she had also learned that winning their respect was often harder than beating their performance standards. The logs were waiting on the beach, 30-foot-long telephone poles that weighed close to 200 pounds each. They looked innocent enough lying in the sand, but Sarah knew from her research that these logs would become instruments of torture before the training was over. Boat crews would carry them everywhere, hold them overhead until their arms gave out, use them for countless exercises designed to build strength and teamwork in equal measure. "All right. Boat Crew 7, Williams said, taking charge naturally. "Let's get this thing up and see what we're dealing with." The 7 crew members positioned themselves along the log, found their grips, and lifted on Williams's command. The weight was immediately apparent. 200 pounds distributed among 7 people should have been manageable, but the awkward shape and size of the log made it challenging to coordinate their movements. "Left shoulder," Williams called out, and they maneuvered the log into position. Sarah adjusted her grip and settled the weight against her shoulder, feeling the rough wood dig into her skin through her t-shirt. This would be her constant companion for the foreseeable future, the source of pain and frustration, and hopefully the foundation of teamwork with her crew. They began to move as Rodriguez had instructed, first walking along the beach to get used to the log's weight and balance. Sarah found herself in the number 4 position, sandwiched between Martinez in front of her and Johnson behind. Thompson had taken the number 1 spot, directly behind Williams, where he could help guide the crew's movements and keep an eye on everyone's performance. The walking wasn't too difficult, but Sarah could already feel the weight pressing against her shoulder, could sense that her crew was still learning how to move together efficiently. Every time someone's pace changed or their grip shifted, the entire crew felt it. They were connected now, literally and figuratively, in a way that would define their Bud-S experience. After 10 minutes of walking, Rodriguez called for the first exercise. "Crews, halt. Log overhead press. Continuous motion. Begin." 7 pairs of hands gripped the log and lifted it from their shoulders to overhead position. The weight that had been manageable on their shoulders suddenly became a crushing burden when held at arm's length above their heads. Sarah's shoulders and arms engaged immediately, every muscle fiber firing to keep the log stable. "1, Rodriguez called out. The crews lowered the log to chest level and then pressed it back overhead. 2. Sarah's arms were already burning. The weight was distributed among 7 people, but each person still had to lift nearly 30 pounds in an awkward position while coordinating with 6 other people. Her deltoids screamed in protest as the log went up and down, with Rodriguez counting each repetition in his measured, emotionless voice. 15! The log felt like it weighed 500 pounds now. Sarah's arms were shaking slightly, and she could hear grunts of effort from her teammates. But no one was giving up. No one was letting their end of the log drop. 25! Sarah's vision was starting to blur slightly from the effort. Her shoulders felt like they were on fire, and her grip was beginning to slip on the smooth wood. But she held on, adjusting her hand position slightly to maintain control. 30, Rodriguez finally called. Logs down! The crews gratefully lowered their logs to the sand, and Sarah immediately began shaking out her arms to restore circulation. Around her, she could hear the heavy breathing of her teammates, could see the sweat that had already begun to soak through their t-shirts despite the cool morning air. But there was no time to recover. Log overhead, hold position, Rodriguez commanded. Once again, 7 pairs of hands lifted the log overhead, but this time, instead of pressing it up and down, they simply held it there. Held it while their arms screamed and their shoulders shook and their minds started to question whether they were strong enough to continue. Sarah had experienced this kind of static muscle fatigue before in training, but never while trying to coordinate with 6 other people. She could feel when Martinez in front of her started to struggle, could sense when Johnson behind her began to lower his end slightly. The log wanted to tip forward or backward, and it took constant communication and adjustment to keep it level. "Time," Thompson called out from the front. "How much longer?" "You'll know when I tell you to put it down," Rodriguez replied calmly. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to find her center, the place of mental calm she had cultivated through years of difficult training. Her arms were shaking visibly now, and she could feel the log starting to dip as her grip began to fail. But she refused to be the weak link. She refused to be the reason her crew failed their first team exercise. "Come on, Seven!" Williams shouted from the front of the crew. "We got this! Hold it together!" His voice cut through the pain and gave Sarah something to focus on other than the burning in her shoulders. She adjusted her grip once more and found a few more seconds of strength. Around her, she could hear similar encouragement from other crew members, could feel their determination feeding her own. "Logs down!" The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah's arms dropped to her sides, and she spent several seconds just trying to restore feeling to her hands. But even as she recovered, she was analyzing her performance and that of her teammates. Williams was clearly the natural leader, strong and vocal and able to motivate others. Martinez was tough and steady, never complaining even when he was obviously struggling. Johnson was methodical and precise, adjusting his position constantly to maintain proper form. Thompson was strong, probably the strongest member of the crew, but he seemed more focused on his individual performance than on helping the team succeed. Roberts was quiet but reliable, never drawing attention to himself, but never letting his end of the log drop either, and Peterson was starting to worry her. During both exercises, she had noticed that Peterson's end of the log seemed to dip more than the others, that his breathing was more labored, that his face was getting redder with each passing minute. He was a big guy, tall and broad-shouldered, but size didn't always translate to functional strength. More importantly, he was starting to look like someone who was questioning his decision to be here. "Next evolution, crews will run 2 miles with logs," Rodriguez announced. "Route is posted on the board. Stay together, help each other, and remember that your time is only as good as your slowest crew member." Sarah felt her stomach tighten slightly. Running with logs was one of the most challenging evolutions in Bud-S, requiring not just individual fitness, but perfect teamwork and communication. She was confident in her own running ability, but she was starting to doubt whether Peterson could keep up. As if reading her thoughts, Thompson appeared at her elbow as they prepared to lift the log. "Hope you're ready for a real test," he said quietly. "Because if you can't keep up, you're going to drag all of us down." Sarah looked him directly in the eyes. "I'm ready. Are you?" Thompson smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "I've been ready my whole life. Question is whether you belong here at all." Before Sarah could respond, Williams called for the crew to lift the log. 7 pairs of hands found their positions, 7 backs bent to take the weight, and Boat Crew 7 began their first real test as a team. The run started well enough. The crew moved in formation along the beach, their feet finding a rhythm in the soft sand. The log bounced slightly with each step, but they were managing to keep it stable and maintain their pace. Sarah settled into her position and focused on matching her stride to Martinez in front of her, trusting that Johnson behind her was doing the same thing. But by the half-mile mark, cracks were starting to show. Peterson was breathing heavily, his face flushed red despite the cool morning air. His stride was becoming irregular, sometimes lengthening to catch up, and sometimes shortening when he couldn't maintain the pace. Each variation sent a ripple through the entire crew, forcing everyone else to adjust their position and timing. "Stay together, Peterson," Williams called from the front. "Find the rhythm." Peterson nodded but didn't respond verbally. Sarah could see sweat streaming down his face and neck, could hear his breathing becoming more labored with each passing minute. She had seen this look before in training partners who were hitting their limits, who were entering the danger zone where physical capability and mental determination would be tested to their breaking points. The course turned inland at the 1-mile mark, taking them up a gradual hill that would have been barely noticeable to a lone runner, but felt like a mountain to 7 people carrying a 200-pound log. Sarah's legs began to burn as the incline increased, and she could hear her teammates' breathing become more strained. Then Peterson stumbled. It was a small misstep, nothing more than a momentary loss of balance, but it sent a shock wave through the entire crew. The log shifted suddenly to the right, forcing everyone to adjust their grip and position to keep it from falling. Johnson, who was running directly behind Peterson, had to hop sideways to avoid being knocked down. "Peterson!" Thompson shouted from the front. "What the hell, man?" "Sorry," Peterson gasped. "I'm okay. Keep going." But Sarah could see that he wasn't okay. His face was now bright red, his breathing was ragged, and his grip on the log was becoming unreliable. He was entering the zone where people made dangerous mistakes, where determination could push someone beyond their physical limits and into real trouble. She made a decision that would define her relationship with Boat Crew 7 for the rest of Bud S. Instead of maintaining her position in the crew, instead of focusing solely on her own performance, Sarah began to adjust her grip and body position to help support Peterson's end of the log. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in weight distribution that took some of the burden off his shoulders. But as the run continued and Peterson continued to struggle, she found herself carrying more and more of the load. Thompson noticed the shift immediately. "Chen," he called back, "stay in your position. Everyone carries their own weight." Sarah ignored him and continued to adjust her grip, taking as much pressure off Peterson as she could while still maintaining her own position. She could feel the extra weight in her shoulders and arms, could sense that she was pushing herself closer to her own limits. But she could also see that Peterson was on the verge of collapse, and she knew that if he went down, the entire crew would fail. The final half-mile was a test of willpower as much as physical capability. Sarah's shoulders were on fire from carrying extra weight, her legs were heavy from the sustained pace, and her lungs burned with each breath. But she refused to let Peterson fail. She refused to let her crew fail. She could hear Thompson cursing behind her, could sense his frustration with the situation. But she could also hear Williams shouting encouragement from the front, could feel Martinez maintaining steady pace ahead of her, could sense that the crew was coming together when it mattered most. They crossed the finish line as a team, all 7 crew members still connected to the log, all 7 still on their feet. Their time wasn't the fastest among the boat crews, but they had finished together. They had completed their first major test as a team. Rodriguez recorded their time without comment, but Sarah caught him watching Peterson closely as the big man bent over with his hands on his knees, fighting to catch his breath. She wondered if the instructor had seen Peterson's struggles, if he had noticed the way she had adjusted to help her teammate, if he approved or disapproved of her decision. As Boat Crew 7 walked slowly back toward the compound, Peterson fell into step beside her. "Thanks," he said quietly, his voice still strained from the run. "I know what you did back there." Sarah shrugged. "We're a crew. We succeed together or we fail together." Peterson nodded, but his expression suggested he understood the deeper implications of her words. She had put herself at risk to help him, had made herself a target for Thompson's criticism and Rodriguez's scrutiny. She had chosen teamwork over individual performance, had prioritized the crew's success over her own standings. It was exactly the kind of decision that would define her entire Bud's experience, for better or worse. As they reached the compound and prepared to rack their log, Thompson approached her one more time. "That was a mistake," he said bluntly. "You can't carry weak links forever. Sooner or later, they're gonna drag you down with them." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Then I guess we better make sure there are no weak links." Thompson shook his head and walked away, but Sarah could see something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Not respect, exactly, but perhaps a grudging acknowledgement that she wasn't going to be as easy to dismiss as he had assumed. She had survived her first day at Bud S. She had posted solid individual scores and helped her crew complete their first team evolution. But more importantly, she had begun to understand what this place was really about. It wasn't just about being strong enough to carry a log or fast enough to run 2 miles. It was about being willing to sacrifice your individual performance for the success of the team. It was about finding strength when you thought you had none left, not for your own sake, but for the sake of the person next to you. Sarah Chen had spent months preparing her body for Bud S. Now she was beginning to understand that the real preparation had been mental and emotional, and that her biggest challenges were still ahead of her. But as she looked around at her crew members, as she felt the first beginnings of the bonds that would either carry them through the next 24 weeks or break under the pressure, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was exactly where she belonged. 2 weeks into Bud S, Sarah Chen had learned to sleep through almost anything. The sound of helicopters overhead at 3 in the morning, the crash of waves against the seawall during high tide, the groans and whispers of fellow candidates trying to work through injuries that would have sent normal people to the hospital. What woke her this particular Wednesday morning wasn't a sound at all, but the absence of one. She opened her eyes in the pre-dawn darkness and realized that Peterson's bunk across from hers was silent. No snoring, no restless shifting, no sound at all. She sat up quietly and looked toward his rack. Empty. The sheets were pulled tight and the pillow was positioned exactly as it should be. But there was something about the stillness that told her everything she needed to know. Peterson had rung the bell. Sarah felt a hollow sensation in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Peterson had been struggling since day 1, but she had thought he was getting stronger. During the past week, he had kept up better during runs and had seemed more confident during log PT. She had been helping him with technique during swim sessions, showing him small adjustments that could save energy over long distances. Just yesterday, he had thanked her for believing in him when he didn't believe in himself. Now, he was gone. She lay back down and stared at the ceiling, trying to process what this meant for Boat Crew 7. They would continue with 6 members instead of 7, which meant each person would carry more weight during log evolutions. More importantly, they would have to rebuild their team chemistry without the gentle giant who had become their motivation to stick together. At 0430, the overhead lights snapped on, and Rodriguez's voice filled the barracks. "Rise and shine, tadpoles! Another beautiful day in paradise! Muster on the grinder in 15 minutes, PT gear, move!" Sarah rolled out of her rack and began the familiar routine of getting dressed in the dark. Around her, the remaining members of Boat Crew 7 were doing the same thing, but nobody mentioned Peterson's empty bunk. In Bud S, when someone left, they just left. No ceremonies, no goodbye speeches, no explanations required. But Sarah could see the impact on her teammates' faces. Williams looked tired, older somehow, as if Peterson's departure had reminded him of his own vulnerability. Martinez was quieter than usual, methodically lacing his boots without his normal stream of good-natured commentary. Johnson moved with mechanical precision, but his usual easy smile was nowhere to be seen. Thompson was the only one who seemed unaffected. He dressed quickly and efficiently, his expression neutral, as if losing a crew member was just another evolution to be completed and forgotten. The grinder was the large asphalt courtyard at the center of the Bud S compound, surrounded by buildings that housed classrooms, administrative offices, and the instructors' spaces. At this hour, it was still dark, lit only by fluorescent lights that created harsh shadows and made everything look like a black and white photograph. 43 candidates formed up in ranks, down from the 52 who had started 2 weeks earlier. Sarah found her position and stood at attention, her eyes focused straight ahead. She had learned not to look around during formations, not to give the instructors any excuse to single her out for special attention. Rodriguez appeared from the darkness like a predator emerging from cover. His uniform was perfect, despite the early hour. His bearing military straight, his expression unreadable. Behind him walked 3 other instructors, each carrying clipboards and wearing the same look of professional skepticism. "Good morning, class," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying easily across the formation. "I trust you all slept well in your comfortable beds, dreaming of home, and wondering if you made the right decision to come to this place." He began walking slowly between the ranks, his boots making sharp sounds against the asphalt. "Some of your classmates have already answered that question. They've decided that Bud S isn't for them. They've chosen comfort over challenge, certainty over risk. They've rung the bell and gone back to the regular Navy, where life is predictable and safe." Sarah could feel him approaching her position, but kept her eyes forward. She had learned that the instructors were always watching, always looking for signs of weakness or doubt. Any flinch, any sideways glance, any expression that suggested a candidate was anything less than completely focused could result in unwanted attention. For those of you still here, congratulations. You've survived the easy part. The next few weeks are when Bud S gets serious. This is when we separate the tourists from the professionals, when we find out who really wants to be here and who's just along for the ride. He stopped directly in front of Sarah's row and turned to face the formation. "Today you begin pool competency training. For the next 3 weeks, you'll spend most of your time underwater, learning to function when your lungs are burning and your brain is screaming for air. You'll learn to solve problems while drowning, to remain calm when everything in your body is telling you to panic." Sarah felt her pulse quicken slightly. Pool comp was legendary among SEAL candidates, the evolution that broke more dreams than any other single training phase. She had prepared for it extensively, spending hours in swimming pools practicing breath-holding and underwater problem-solving. But she knew that no amount of preparation could fully simulate the psychological pressure of having instructors actively trying to make her panic while she was already struggling to breathe. "The pool doesn't care about your bench press max or your run time," Rodriguez continued. "The pool doesn't care about your college degree or your family connections. The pool cares about one thing. Can you think clearly when you're dying?" He resumed walking, his pace measured and deliberate. "Some of you think you're water comfortable because you were on your high school swim team. Some of you think you're ready because you can hold your breath for 2 minutes in your bathtub. You're wrong. Pool comp isn't about swimming. It's about drowning with style." Sarah had researched every aspect of pool competency training that she could find. She knew about the 50-meter underwater swim, the equipment retrieval exercise, the harassment phase where instructors would try to make candidates panic by removing their masks and tying their air hoses in knots. She had practiced the required techniques until they were automatic, had built her breath-holding capacity to levels that surprised even her. But she also knew that knowing what to expect and experiencing it firsthand were completely different things. Pool comp had ended the dreams of Olympic swimmers and Navy divers, of candidates who were stronger and faster and more experienced than she was. It was the great equalizer, the place where mental toughness mattered more than physical ability. "Your first evolution begins at 0600 hours, Rodriguez announced. "Breakfast is from 0530 to 0550. That gives you 20 minutes to eat, use the head, and get to the pool. I suggest you use that time wisely. It may be the last relaxed meal you have for a while." As the formation was dismissed, Sarah fell into step with the rest of Boat Crew 6, as they were now called. The walk to the chow hall was silent, each candidate lost in their own thoughts about what the day would bring. The breakfast was typically military. Scrambled eggs that looked like rubber, bacon that was either raw or burned, coffee strong enough to dissolve spoons. Sarah ate mechanically, focusing on getting enough calories to fuel her body while trying not to think too much about the challenge ahead. Thompson sat across from her, attacking his food with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. Halfway through the meal, He looked up and spoke for the first time since Peterson's departure. 6 people means more weight per person on log evolutions, he said matter-of-factly. Means we can't afford any weak links. Williams looked up from his own tray. We don't have any weak links. Peterson was getting stronger. He just needed more time. Time we don't have, Thompson replied. This isn't Little League. There are no participation trophies here. People who can't keep up need to go home before they get someone else hurt. Sarah set down her fork and met Thompson's gaze directly. Peterson was part of our crew. We should have done more to help him. Thompson laughed, but there was no humor in it. Help him what? Help him pretend he belonged here? Help him delay the inevitable? He made the right choice. At least he figured out he wasn't cut out for this before he got someone killed in the real world. He was stronger than you think, Sarah said quietly. He just needed support. Support? Thompson's voice rose slightly, enough to draw attention from nearby tables. This isn't a support group. This is military training for the most elite unit in the world. Support comes after you prove you can handle the job. Williams intervened before the conversation could escalate further. Enough. Peterson's gone. We're still here. We deal with what we have and move forward. Sarah nodded, but she could feel the tension in the crew's dynamic. Thompson's attitude toward Peterson had been problematic from the beginning, and now his comments were creating division among the remaining members. She wondered how long their crew could function with that kind of internal conflict. The pool facility was located in a separate building from the main training areas, a stark concrete structure that looked more like a laboratory than a swimming facility. Inside, the air was thick with chlorine and humidity, and the sound of water pumps created a constant background hum. The pool itself was deeper than most, designed for underwater training exercises that required considerable depth for safety. 23 candidates from Sarah's class were present for the first day of pool comp, along with candidates from the class ahead of them who were finishing their final week of training. The experienced candidates looked relaxed, confident, moving through their exercises with the fluid precision of people who had mastered the required techniques. But Sarah could see the stress in their eyes, the weight of weeks spent underwater pushing their limits every single day. Instructor Chief Petty Officer Davis stood at the edge of the pool, a clipboard in his hand and a stopwatch around his neck. He was shorter than Rodriguez, but somehow more intimidating, with the lean build of a long-time swimmer and eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's deepest fears. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades in the water, both in training and in real-world operations. Gentlemen, and lady, he began, his gaze finding Sarah immediately. Welcome to my pool. For the next 3 weeks, this will be your classroom, your office, and your church. You will learn to worship the breath in your lungs because that breath is all that stands between you and failure. He began walking along the edge of the pool, his boots clicking against the wet concrete. Pool competency training consists of 4 major evolutions: the 50-meter underwater swim, treading water for 5 minutes, equipment retrieval, and harassment training. Each evolution must be completed to standard before you can advance. There are no retakes, no second chances, no participation awards. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she listened to the requirements. She had practiced all of these exercises, but she had never done them while being evaluated by instructors who were specifically looking for reasons to fail her. The 50-meter underwater swim is exactly what it sounds like. You will swim 2 lengths of this pool without surfacing, without touching the bottom, without any assistance of any kind. Your technique must be perfect, your navigation precise. If you surface even once, you fail. If you touch the bottom, you fail. If you show any signs of panic or loss of control, you fail. Davis stopped walking and faced the candidates directly. Treading water for 5 minutes sounds simple. It's not. You'll be wearing full utilities, boots, and equipment weighing approximately 40 pounds. You'll maintain position in the center of the pool while instructors attempt to distract you, splash you, and generally make your life miserable. Your head must stay above water at all times. If you go under for more than 2 seconds, you fail. Sarah's mouth was becoming dry as she listened to each requirement. She had trained for all of these scenarios, but the psychological pressure of having her every movement evaluated was already affecting her confidence. Equipment retrieval requires you to dive to the bottom of the pool, retrieve a piece of scuba gear, and return it to the surface while holding your breath. The gear will be positioned differently each time, sometimes in easy locations, sometimes not. You'll have one attempt per piece of equipment. Failure to retrieve any item means failure of the entire evolution. Davis smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring expression. And finally, harassment training. This is where we find out what you're really made of. You'll complete various underwater exercises while instructors do everything possible to make you panic. We'll remove your mask, tie your air hoses in knots, spin you around until you don't know which way is up. Your job is to solve the problems calmly and efficiently, while your brain is telling you to surface immediately. Sarah could feel sweat forming on her forehead, despite the cool air in the pool building. She had read about harassment training, had seen videos and photographs, but hearing it described by an instructor made it seem more real and more terrifying. Your first evolution begins now, Davis announced. Candidate Chen, you're up first. Sarah's heart jumped into her throat. Being called first wasn't necessarily good or bad, but it meant that every instructor would be watching her performance closely, using it to establish expectations for the rest of the candidates. There would be no opportunity to observe other candidates' techniques or learn from their mistakes. She approached the edge of the pool and began her pre-swim routine, the same series of movements she had practiced thousands of times. Deep breathing to oxygenate her blood, gentle stretching to loosen her muscles, mental visualization of the swim itself, seeing herself gliding through the water with perfect technique and complete control. Candidate Chen, Davis said, you will swim from this end of the pool to the far end and back without surfacing. You will maintain a depth of at least 6 feet throughout the swim. You will complete the distance in under 2 minutes. Your swim begins when you enter the water and ends when you touch this wall upon your return. Any questions? No, Chief, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Enter the water. Sarah slipped into the pool feet first, feeling the cool water envelop her body. She treaded water for a moment, taking several deep breaths to prepare her body and mind for what was ahead. Around the pool, she could sense the instructors and fellow candidates watching her every movement, evaluating her technique and confidence level. Candidate Chen, on my mark, you will begin your swim. Ready. Execute. Sarah took her final breath and dove beneath the surface, immediately settling into the streamlined position she had practiced endlessly. The water was crystal clear, allowing her to see the bottom of the pool 12 feet below and the far wall 25 meters ahead. She began her underwater stroke, a modified breaststroke that maximized efficiency while conserving oxygen. The first length felt comfortable, almost easy. Her body moved through the water with the fluid grace of someone who had spent most of her life swimming, and her breathing preparation was paying off. She reached the far wall with oxygen to spare and made her turn efficiently, pushing off strongly to begin the return length. But the second length was always harder. Her oxygen reserves were lower now, and her muscles were beginning to produce carbon dioxide that made her body want to breathe. She could feel the familiar sensation of her lungs beginning to burn, could sense her heart rate increasing as her body fought to maintain performance with limited oxygen. She forced herself to maintain perfect technique even as her body began to demand air. Smooth strokes that cut through the water efficiently, streamlined body position that minimized drag, steady kicks that provided propulsion without wasting energy. She had trained for this moment, had prepared her body to function normally, even when her brain was screaming for oxygen. With 10 meters to go, her vision began to tunnel slightly, a sign that her oxygen levels were getting dangerously low. But she had experienced this sensation during training, had learned to recognize it as a warning rather than an emergency. She maintained her stroke rate and focused on the wall ahead, trusting her preparation and her body's ability to complete the task. Her hand touched the wall exactly 1 minute and 47 seconds after she had begun the swim. She surfaced smoothly and took several deep breaths, her heart rate gradually returning to normal as oxygen flooded back into her system. Davis looked at his stopwatch and made a mark on his clipboard. Time, 1:47, technique, satisfactory, pass. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she kept her expression neutral. She had completed the first evolution successfully, but there were still 3 more to go, and each would be more challenging than the last. Candidate Thompson, you're up. Thompson approached the pool with the same confidence he brought to every other evolution, his expression calm and focused. He had been a college swimmer, Sarah remembered, and water was probably his strongest environment. But as she watched him prepare for his swim, she noticed something in his technique that gave her pause. His breathing preparation was rushed, lacking the methodical approach that built maximum oxygen reserves. His entry into the water was slightly sloppy, creating bubbles that would increase drag. Most concerning, his stroke technique was more suited to surface swimming than underwater efficiency. Thompson pushed off from the wall and immediately began swimming hard, using a powerful freestyle stroke that looked impressive but was burning through his oxygen reserves at an unsustainable rate. Sarah could see that he was treating this like a sprint race rather than an endurance challenge, relying on speed rather than efficiency. He reached the far wall with good time, but was clearly working harder than necessary. His turn was solid, and he began the return length with apparent confidence. But Sarah could see signs of distress earlier than she had expected. His stroke rate was increasing, his body position was becoming less streamlined, and his kicks were becoming more erratic. With 15 meters to go, Thompson's technique began to break down completely. His strokes became shorter and more frantic, his body position deteriorated, and Sarah could see him fighting the urge to surface. He was experiencing exactly what she had trained to avoid: oxygen debt combined with rising carbon dioxide levels that created an overwhelming urge to breathe. Thompson touched the wall at 1 minute and 52 seconds, surfaced immediately, and began gasping for air. His face was red, his breathing was labored, and he looked like someone who had just escaped drowning. Davis looked at his stopwatch and shook his head. Time, 1:52. Technique, unsatisfactory. You swam like you were in a sprint race rather than an underwater endurance event. You'll repeat this evolution tomorrow with proper technique or you'll be dropped from training. Thompson's confident expression cracked slightly, replaced by something that looked like surprise and concern. He was used to succeeding through natural ability and determination, but pool comp required more than that. It required technique, preparation, and the kind of mental discipline that couldn't be faked or forced. As the other candidates completed their swims, Sarah began to understand the pattern. The candidates who approached the evolution with respect and proper technique generally succeeded. Those who relied on natural ability or tried to muscle through the challenge often failed, regardless of their overall fitness level. Williams passed with a solid time and good technique, his leadership experience showing in his methodical approach to preparation. Martinez struggled initially but managed to complete the swim through sheer determination and excellent body position. Johnson's swimming background served him well, and he completed the evolution with time to spare. Roberts surprised everyone by posting the fastest time of the group, his quiet confidence translating into nearly perfect underwater technique. It was a reminder that the loudest voices weren't always attached to the most capable performers. By the end of the first day, 4 candidates from various classes had been dropped from training for failing to meet pool comp standards. 2 had failed the 50-meter swim, 1 had failed treading water, and 1 had panicked during equipment retrieval and surfaced before completing the task. Sarah walked back to the barracks with her crew, her mind already focused on the next day's challenges. The 50-meter swim was behind her, but treading water in full gear would test her strength and endurance in different ways. Equipment retrieval would require breath-holding ability combined with problem-solving skills under pressure. And harassment training was still ahead, the evolution that separated true SEAL candidates from everyone else who thought they wanted to be one. That evening, she found Thompson in the equipment room, practicing knot tying with lengths of rope. His movements were precise but mechanical, lacking the fluid confidence he usually displayed during training evolutions. "You okay?" she asked, taking a seat nearby and beginning her own equipment maintenance routine. Thompson looked up, his expression guarded. "I'm fine, just working on technique." "Your swim looked strong," Sarah said diplomatically. "You've got the speed. Maybe just need to adjust the efficiency." Thompson set down the rope and studied her for a long moment. "You offering to help me?" "We're all in this together," Sarah replied. "Your success helps the crew, just like everyone else's. Even after the way I treated Peterson? After the way I've been treating you?" Sarah continued working on her equipment, her hands steady as she cleaned and organized her gear. "Peterson's gone because he wasn't ready, not because you were hard on him. And you've been treating me like competition, which I respect. But pool comp is different. This isn't about who's stronger or faster. It's about who can think clearly when they're drowning." Thompson was quiet for several minutes, apparently weighing her words against his own assessment of the situation. "What would you suggest?" he asked finally. Sarah looked up from her gear and met his eyes directly. "Your stroke technique is designed for speed, not efficiency. You're burning through oxygen too fast. And you're not building enough oxygen reserves before you start. Small changes that could make a big difference. And you'd be willing to work with me on this? If you want the help." Thompson nodded slowly. "I might take you up on that. But this doesn't change anything between us overall. I still think you're here to make a point rather than to be a SEAL." Sarah smiled. "Then I guess I'll have to prove you wrong about that too." The next morning brought treading water evolution, and Sarah found herself facing a new type of challenge. She stood at the edge of the pool wearing full utilities that were soaked with water and weighted down with equipment. The fabric clung to her skin, the boots felt like anchors on her feet, and the gear strapped to her body shifted awkwardly with every movement. "Candidate Chen," Davis announced. "You will tread water in the center of the pool for 5 minutes. Your head must remain above water at all times. You may use any technique you choose, but you may not touch the walls, the bottom, or any pool equipment. Your time begins when you enter the water." Sarah slipped into the pool and immediately felt the weight of her gear trying to pull her down. Treading water in a swimsuit was effortless for someone with her swimming background. Treading water while wearing 40 pounds of waterlogged equipment was an entirely different challenge that required constant effort and perfect technique. She settled into a rhythm immediately, using a combination of kicks and arm movements that kept her head comfortably above the surface while conserving energy for the long haul ahead. 5 minutes didn't sound like a long time, but she knew that every second would feel like an eternity once her muscles began to fatigue. The first minute passed easily enough. Her technique was efficient, her breathing was controlled, and her body position was stable. Around the pool, she could see instructors making notes on their clipboards, evaluating her form and endurance level. But by the second minute, she could feel the weight of her gear more acutely. The waterlogged fabric seemed to get heavier with every passing second, and her boots felt like they were actively trying to drag her to the bottom. She adjusted her technique slightly, increasing her kick rate while maintaining the same arm movements. The third minute was when the real challenge began. Her legs were starting to burn from the constant kicking motion, and her arms were working harder to maintain her position in the water. She could feel her breathing becoming slightly more labored, and she had to concentrate to maintain her head position above the waterline. 2 minutes remaining, Davis announced. Sarah felt a psychological shift at the halfway mark. 2 minutes was manageable. 2 minutes was something she had done hundreds of times during training. She settled deeper into her rhythm and tried to ignore the growing fatigue in her muscles. But the 4th minute tested her resolve. Her legs felt heavy now, her kicks were becoming less powerful, and she had to work consciously to keep her head up. The gear seemed to shift with every movement, throwing off her balance and forcing her to make constant adjustments to her technique. 1 minute remaining. The final minute was pure mental toughness. Sarah's muscles were screaming in protest, her breathing was becoming more difficult, and every instinct in her body was telling her to grab on to something solid. But she had trained for this moment, had pushed through this exact type of fatigue dozens of times in preparation for Bud S. She focused on her breathing, on maintaining her rhythm, on the knowledge that 1 minute was 60 seconds and 60 seconds always ended eventually. Her legs continued to kick even when they felt like lead weights. Her arms continued to move even when they seemed to be moving through molasses rather than water. Time. Sarah felt a surge of relief as she swam to the edge of the pool and pulled herself out. Her legs were shaking slightly from the sustained effort, but she had completed the evolution successfully. More importantly, she had maintained her composure throughout the challenge, never showing signs of panic or distress that would have concerned the instructors. Time, 5 minutes. Technique, good. Head position, acceptable. Pass. Sarah nodded her thanks and moved aside to watch the other candidates face the same challenge. Williams struggled more than expected, his natural strength working against him as his muscle mass required more energy to keep afloat. Martinez's slight build proved to be an advantage, allowing him to tread water with less effort than the larger candidates. Thompson's turn was particularly interesting to watch. He had clearly taken her advice to heart, approaching the evolution with a more methodical technique than he had used during the swimming portion. His breathing was controlled, his movements were efficient, and he maintained good position throughout the 5 minutes. When Davis announced his passing time, Thompson looked surprised but pleased, as if he hadn't expected the technique adjustments to make such a significant difference. Equipment retrieval proved to be the most technically challenging evolution yet. Candidates were required to dive to the bottom of the 12-foot deep pool, locate specific pieces of scuba gear, and return them to the surface while holding their breath. The gear was positioned differently for each candidate, sometimes in easy-to-reach locations and sometimes buried under other equipment or wedged into corners. Sarah's assigned equipment was a scuba tank that had been placed near the drain at the deepest part of the pool. She approached the edge and took several minutes to prepare, using the breathing techniques that had served her well during the underwater swim. Deep, controlled breaths that maximized her oxygen uptake. Mental visualization of the dive, the retrieval, and the return to the surface. When Davis gave the signal, Sarah took her final breath and dove straight down, her body cutting through the water with minimal splash. The pressure increased noticeably as she descended, and she had to equalize her ears to prevent discomfort. At the bottom, she located her target quickly and assessed the best approach for retrieval. The scuba tank was heavier than she had expected, but she managed to wrap her arms around it and lift it from its position. The added weight made her more negatively buoyant, requiring extra effort to begin her ascent to the surface. She kicked strongly while maintaining her grip on the tank, her lungs beginning to burn as her oxygen reserves decreased. The ascent seemed to take forever, each kick bringing her closer to the surface, but also closer to her oxygen limits. She could feel her body's increasing urgency for air, could sense the familiar signs that her breath-holding time was approaching its maximum safe duration. But she maintained her grip on the equipment and continued her controlled ascent. She broke the surface with the scuba tank in her arms, immediately taking deep breaths to restore her oxygen levels. Davis checked his stopwatch and made a note on his clipboard. Time adequate, retrieval successful, technique good, pass. Sarah felt another wave of accomplishment as she swam to the edge and handed over the equipment. 3 evolutions down, 1 to go. But she knew that the final evolution, harassment training, would be the most challenging of all. Harassment training was scheduled for the following week, giving candidates time to master the basic skills before facing the psychological pressure of instructor interference. Sarah used the time to refine her techniques, spending extra hours in the pool practicing breath-holding and underwater problem-solving. She also continued working with Thompson on his swimming efficiency, a collaboration that surprised both of them. Despite their personality conflicts, they had developed an effective working relationship based on mutual respect for each other's abilities. Thompson's natural strength combined with improved technique was making him a formidable candidate, while Sarah's coaching experience was helping her understand how to communicate complex concepts under pressure. The rest of Boat Crew 6 was developing into a cohesive unit as well. Peterson's departure had initially created doubts about their ability to function as a team, but the remaining members had adjusted their roles and responsibilities to compensate. Williams remained their natural leader, but he had learned to delegate more effectively. Martinez had emerged as their morale officer, always ready with a joke or encouraging word when spirits were low. Johnson's analytical mind made him their problem solver, the person they turned to when technical challenges required creative solutions. Roberts continued to be their quiet strength, never complaining but always performing when his crew needed him most. And Thompson was slowly transforming from antagonist to ally, his competitive nature shifting from opposition to Sarah's presence to support for crew success. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was professional respect based on shared challenges and mutual dependence. The morning of harassment training dawned gray and overcast, with fog rolling in from the Pacific that seemed to match the mood in the candidates' barracks. Sarah had slept poorly, her mind running through scenarios and techniques, even in her dreams. She knew that this evolution would test more than her physical abilities. It would challenge her capacity to remain calm and think clearly when everything around her was designed to create panic and confusion. The pool building seemed more ominous somehow as she walked through the entrance with her classmates. The instructors were already there, more of them than usual, wearing masks and scuba gear that made them look like underwater predators. Their presence sent a clear message. Today would be different. Today would be personal. Davis stood at the edge of the pool with a piece of scuba gear in his hands, a mask, regulator, and air hose that looked simple enough but would become instruments of psychological warfare in the wrong hands. Today you learn the difference between being water comfortable and being water competent, he announced. You'll complete various underwater exercises while my instructors do everything possible to make you panic. They'll remove your mask while you're underwater. They'll tie your air hose in knots. They'll spin you around until you lose all sense of direction. Your job is to solve each problem calmly and efficiently while your brain is telling you to surface immediately. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she listened to the requirements. She had practiced these scenarios individually, but she had never faced them while being actively harassed by instructors who were trained to exploit every weakness and fear. The exercises are simple, Davis continued. Swim to the bottom of the pool, put on the scuba gear, breathe from the regulator for 30 seconds, then remove the gear and return to the surface. Under normal circumstances, this would take about 2 minutes and would be well within the capabilities of any candidate who has made it this far. He smiled, and Sarah felt her stomach tighten. But these won't be normal circumstances. The moment you reach the bottom, my instructors will begin their work. They'll create problems faster than you can solve them. They'll test your ability to think clearly when you're convinced you're drowning. They'll find out if you have what it takes to remain calm when everything around you is chaos. Davis gestured toward the instructors in the water, who were positioned at various depths throughout the pool like sharks waiting for prey. Candidate Chen, you're up first. Sarah approached the edge of the pool and began her breathing preparation, but this time the routine felt different. She wasn't just preparing her body for a physical challenge. She was preparing her mind for psychological warfare. She had to be ready not just to hold her breath and solve problems underwater, but to do it while instructors were actively trying to break her concentration and create panic. She entered the water and swam to the bottom, where the scuba gear waited in a neat arrangement. The moment her hands touched the equipment, she felt the first instructor approach from behind. Before she could react, her diving mask was pulled off her face, instantly reducing her underwater vision to a blur. Sarah forced herself to remain calm as she felt around for the mask, her hands moving methodically through the water despite the disorientation. She had practiced this scenario dozens of times, had trained herself to function underwater without clear vision. Her fingers found the mask strap, and she pulled it back onto her face, clearing the water with a controlled exhale through her nose. But as soon as her vision returned, she felt hands grabbing the air hose and beginning to tie it in knots. This was the scenario she had feared most, the one that required the most complex problem-solving while underwater. She followed the hose with her hands, feeling for the knots and beginning to work them loose methodically. The first knot came free relatively easily, but she could feel the instructor adding more complications even as she worked. Her lungs were beginning to burn now, her oxygen reserves depleting as she focused on problem-solving rather than efficient breathing. But panic would only make the situation worse, would cause her to consume oxygen faster and think less clearly. She managed to free the second knot and felt the air hose straighten in her hands. She followed it to the regulator and placed it in her mouth, pressing the purge valve to clear any water before taking her first breath. The rush of compressed air into her lungs was immediate relief, but she knew she wasn't safe yet. As she breathed from the regulator, trying to restore her oxygen levels, she felt an instructor grab her shoulders and begin spinning her around. The disorientation was immediate and overwhelming, her inner ear struggling to process the constant rotation, while her eyes tried to track the movement of light and shadow around her. Sarah closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, using the regulator to maintain her oxygen levels while her body spun through the water. She had learned during training that fighting the disorientation only made it worse, that the key was to remain calm and wait for the spinning to stop while maintaining control of her essential functions. When the spinning finally ended, she opened her eyes to find herself upside down near the bottom of the pool, completely disoriented and unsure which direction led to the surface. But she had trained for this scenario too, had learned to use the bubbles from her regulator as a guide to determine which way was up. She followed the bubbles upward, removing the scuba gear as she ascended, and preparing for her return to the surface. Her lungs were burning again, her oxygen reserves nearly depleted from the extended underwater problem-solving session, but she maintained her controlled ascent, resisting the urge to rocket toward the surface that could result in injury or disqualification. She broke the surface gasping but under control, immediately beginning the deep breathing routine that would restore her oxygen levels and calm her nervous system. Around the pool, she could see instructors watching her closely, evaluating her performance and stress responses. Davis consulted his stopwatch and clipboard. Time, 3 minutes, 15 seconds. Problem solving, adequate. Stress response, good. Pass. Sarah felt a surge of euphoria that had nothing to do with oxygen deprivation. She had completed harassment training, the evolution that ended more Bud-S dreams than any other. She had remained calm under pressure, had solved problems while her brain was screaming for air, had proven to herself and to the instructors that she possessed the mental toughness required of a Navy SEAL. But more importantly, she had proven to Thompson and her other crew members that she belonged here not because of special treatment or lowered standards, but because she had the same capabilities they did. She was no longer the female candidate trying to prove herself worthy of their acceptance. She was simply another member of Boat Crew 6 who had passed a challenging evolution. Thompson's turn came later in the session, and Sarah watched with interest as he approached the challenge. His technique was solid, his preparation thorough, and his mental approach showed the benefits of their collaboration over the past week. When the instructors began their harassment, he responded with the same methodical problem-solving she had demonstrated, working through each challenge systematically rather than trying to rush through the evolution. He surfaced after 4 minutes and 12 seconds, having taken longer than Sarah, but still well within acceptable parameters. More importantly, he had maintained his composure throughout the harassment, never showing signs of panic or loss of control. As he treaded water next to her while catching his breath, Thompson spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "Thanks for the help with technique. Made a difference." Sarah nodded. "You earned it. That was solid performance under pressure." Thompson studied her for a moment, his expression more thoughtful than she had ever seen it. "You know, when you first showed up here, I thought you were just trying to make a political statement, thought you were more interested in breaking barriers than being a SEAL." "And now?" Sarah asked. Thompson was quiet for a long moment, apparently weighing his words carefully. "Now I think you might actually make it through this program, and if you do, I think you might actually be good at the job." It wasn't friendship, and it wasn't unconditional acceptance. But coming from Thompson, it was acknowledgement that she had earned her place through performance rather than politics. It was recognition that she belonged here not because she was trying to prove a point about women in combat, but because she had the skills and mental toughness required of all SEAL candidates. As Boat Crew 6 walked back to the barracks that evening, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since Peterson's departure. What had initially seemed like a devastating loss for their team had actually forced them to become stronger, more cohesive, more dependent on each other's individual strengths. They were no longer 6 individuals trying to survive Bud-S together. They were a crew, a unit, a team that was beginning to function as something greater than the sum of its parts. But Sarah also knew that pool competency training was just one phase of a 6-month program that would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Ahead lay Hell Week, the legendary 5.5-day ordeal that broke more candidates than every other phase of training combined. Beyond that were months of advanced combat training, diving operations, and specialized skills that would push their physical and mental capabilities to their absolute limits. She had proven she could think clearly while drowning. Now she needed to prove she could function effectively when sleep-deprived, hypothermic, and pushed beyond what most human beings considered possible. But for the first time since arriving at Bud-S, Sarah Chen felt confident that she belonged exactly where she was. She had earned the respect of her instructors through performance, the trust of her teammates through reliability, and the right to be here through sheer determination and skill. The easy part was over. The real test was just beginning, and she couldn't wait to show everyone, including herself, what she was truly capable of when everything was on the line. The bell rang at 0100 hours on Monday morning, but it wasn't the brass bell that ended dreams. It was the alarm that began Hell Week. Sarah Chen had been awake for 20 minutes already, lying in her rack and listening to the steady breathing of her fellow candidates, knowing that this would be the last peaceful moment any of them would experience for the next 5.5 days. In approximately 6 hours, the sun would rise on 132 hours of continuous training that would push the human body and mind beyond what most people considered survivable. 41 candidates remained from the original class of 52. Pool competency training had claimed another 2 victims, and several others had been dropped for injuries or failure to meet academic standards. Now, those 41 would be tested in ways that no amount of preparation could fully simulate. Sarah rose quietly and began her final pre-Hell Week routine. She had practiced this sequence dozens of times, organizing her gear and preparing her mind for what lay ahead. Extra socks, carefully positioned to prevent blisters. Petroleum jelly for chafing. Energy bars distributed throughout her equipment for quick nutrition during the brief moments when food might be available. But most importantly, she had spent weeks conditioning her mind for the psychological warfare that was Hell Week's true purpose. The instructors weren't trying to find the strongest candidates or the fastest runners. They were looking for people who could function when their bodies were broken, their minds were fried, and quitting was the only logical choice. Around her, the other members of Boat Crew 6 were going through their own preparations. Williams was methodically checking his gear for the 3rd time, his natural leadership instincts compelling him to verify every detail. Martinez was lying still with his eyes closed, but Sarah could tell from his breathing that he wasn't asleep. Thompson was doing push-ups next to his rack, burning off nervous energy through physical activity. At 01:30 hours, the barracks exploded in sound and light. "Get up! Get up! Get up! Hell Week has begun! You have 5 minutes to get dressed and get outside! Move! Move! Move!" Instructors flooded through the barracks, shouting orders and creating chaos, banging pots and pans and air horns. Sarah had expected this moment, but the reality was more intense than any preparation could have provided. The noise was overwhelming, the urgency was infectious, and the sudden transition from quiet preparation to complete chaos was designed to test each candidate's ability to function under extreme stress. She dressed quickly in the gear she had laid out, her movements automatic despite the pandemonium around her. Combat boots, utilities, life vest, helmet. The same equipment she had been wearing for months of training, but now it felt different, heavier somehow, as if it understood the significance of what was about to begin. "Outside! Outside! Form up on the grinder! Boat crews together!" Boat Crew 6 rushed outside into the pre-dawn darkness and found their position among the other crews. The instructors had multiplied somehow, as if Hell Week brought additional demons out of the shadows. They moved between the crews like predators, shouting orders and criticism, looking for any sign of weakness or hesitation. Rodriguez appeared in front of the formation, but he looked different now. Gone was the measured professionalism of normal training. In its place was something primal, aggressive, designed to create maximum psychological pressure from the very first moment. "Welcome to Hell Week," he shouted, his voice carrying easily across the compound. "For the next 132 hours, you will get approximately 4 hours of sleep total. You will be wet, cold, hungry, and exhausted beyond anything you've ever experienced. You will discover muscles you didn't know you had, and then you will break every one of them." Sarah could feel the energy shift among the candidates as the reality of what lay ahead began to sink in. This wasn't normal training with scheduled breaks and meals and time to recover. This was designed to be unrelenting, continuous, progressive in its difficulty until even the strongest candidates were functioning on pure willpower. Some of you think you know what tired feels like. Some of you think you understand pain. Some of you believe you're mentally tough enough to handle anything we throw at you. You're wrong. By Wednesday, you'll be hallucinating. By Thursday, you'll be questioning your sanity. By Friday, you'll understand why we call this Hell Week. The instructors began moving among the crews, making individual assessments and psychological evaluations. Sarah felt one of them stop directly behind her, close enough that she could sense his presence without seeing him. "Candidate Chen," the instructor said quietly, his voice just loud enough for her crew to hear. "You sure you want to be here? Hell Week has a way of revealing who people really are underneath all the training and preparation. You sure you're ready to find out who you really are?" Sarah kept her eyes forward and her voice steady. "Hoo-ya!" Instructor. We'll see about that. The first evolution was deceptively simple. A 4-mile run along the beach in full gear. Under normal circumstances, Sarah could complete this distance easily, even with the added weight of her equipment. But Hell Week wasn't about normal circumstances. It was about performing standard evolutions while already exhausted, wet, cold, and under constant psychological pressure. The run began in formation, 41 candidates moving together along the sand in the pre-dawn darkness. But as the miles accumulated and the sand made each step more difficult, the formation began to stretch out. Stronger runners pulled ahead, average runners settled into the middle of the pack, and weaker runners began to fall behind. Sarah found herself in the front third of the group, her months of preparation paying off as her body settled into an efficient rhythm. But she wasn't running for individual performance now. She was running as part of Boat Crew 6, and that meant staying with her teammates regardless of her own capabilities. Williams was setting a strong pace ahead of her, his natural leadership extending to physical performance. Martinez was struggling slightly, but maintaining position through sheer determination. Thompson was running with the controlled aggression that characterized everything he did, pushing himself harder than necessary, but refusing to show weakness. Johnson was falling behind. Sarah could see him losing ground with each passing minute, his tall frame working against him in the soft sand. His breathing was becoming labored, his stride was shortening, and his face showed the kind of strain that suggested he was already approaching his limits. She made a decision that would define not just her Hell Week experience, but her entire relationship with Boat Crew 6 going forward. Instead of maintaining her position in the crew, instead of focusing on her own performance, she dropped back to run alongside Johnson. She didn't say anything initially, just matched his pace and let him know through her presence that he wasn't alone. "I'm okay," Johnson gasped after a few minutes. "You don't need to stay back here." "We finished together," Sarah replied simply. It was the same philosophy she had applied to helping Peterson, the same commitment to crew success over individual achievement. But this time, it was different. This was Hell Week, where every decision had consequences and every moment of extra effort could be the difference between completing the program and ringing the bell. For the next 2 miles, Sarah ran at Johnson's pace, offering quiet encouragement and helping him maintain his position in the formation. She could feel her own energy reserves being depleted more quickly than necessary, could sense that she was making a choice that might cost her later when she needed every ounce of strength for her own survival. But she could also see the impact on Johnson's performance. With someone running beside him, offering support and encouragement, he was able to maintain a pace that kept him with the main group. More importantly, he was building confidence that would serve him well in the challenges ahead. Thompson noticed what she was doing and dropped back to join them. "You two need to pick it up," he said, but his tone was more supportive than critical. "We stick together, but we stick together at a pace that gets us all through this thing." The 3 of them formed a small support unit within the larger crew, working together to maintain position and build momentum. When Johnson stumbled in the soft sand, Thompson was there to steady him. When Sarah's own pace began to flag from the extra effort of helping her teammate, Johnson found a reserve of strength to match her sacrifice. They crossed the finish line as a crew, all 6 members together, tired but intact. It wasn't the fastest time among the boat crews, but it was respectable, and more importantly, it was achieved without leaving anyone behind. Rodriguez was waiting at the finish line with his ever-present clipboard, making notes about crew performance and individual contributions. Sarah wondered what he was writing about her decision to help Johnson, whether he saw it as leadership or as a sign that she was already struggling with the pace. "Boat Crew 6, Rodriguez announced. "Adequate performance. No one left behind. That's what we like to see. But adequate won't get you through Hell Week. The pace gets faster from here, and the challenges get harder. Make sure you're all ready for what's coming next." What came next was surf passage. The Pacific Ocean in December was cold enough to stop a human heart, literally. The water temperature hovered around 55 degrees, cold enough to cause hypothermia in minutes and incapacitation in less than an hour. But surf passage required candidates to enter that water repeatedly, to swim through waves that could crush them against the rocky shore, to function normally while their bodies shut down from cold exposure. Boat Crew 6 stood on the beach in their utilities, looking out at 8-foot swells that crashed against the shore with enough force to knock a person unconscious. The water was dark gray-green, churning with sand and debris, more like liquid concrete than something humans were supposed to enter voluntarily. "Crews will enter the water and swim beyond the surf line," Davis announced from his position on the beach. "Once you reach calm water, you will tread water as a crew for 10 minutes. Then you will swim back through the surf and return to shore. Any crew that loses a member fails the evolution. Any individual who cannot complete the swim fails Hell Week." Sarah had trained for cold water exposure, had spent hours in swimming pools cooled to uncomfortable temperatures. But looking at the Pacific Ocean in December, she realized that no amount of preparation could fully simulate what they were about to experience. "Boat Crew 6, enter the water!" The shock was immediate and overwhelming. The cold hit her like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs and causing every muscle in her body to contract involuntarily. Her body's first instinct was to get out of the water immediately, to flee from the life-threatening cold and find warmth and safety on dry land. But Sarah had trained for this moment, had conditioned herself to recognize the body's panic response and push through it anyway. She forced herself to begin swimming, her strokes awkward at first as her muscles struggled to function in the frigid water. Around her, she could hear the gasps and sharp breathing of her crew members as they experienced the same shock. Williams was powering through the waves with his characteristic determination, but even his strong swimming was affected by the cold. Martinez was struggling more obviously, his slight build making him more vulnerable to rapid heat loss. Thompson was having the most difficulty. Despite his natural strength and swimming ability, he was showing signs of cold water shock that were affecting his technique and judgment. His strokes were becoming erratic, his breathing was rapid and shallow, and Sarah could see panic beginning to creep into his movements. The swim to the calm water beyond the surf line took only 5 minutes, but it felt like an hour. By the time they reached the designated area and began treading water, Sarah's body temperature had dropped noticeably. Her fingers were numb, her core was beginning to shiver involuntarily, and her mental processes were starting to slow down. But the 10 minutes of treading water were when the real challenge began. Hypothermia wasn't just about being cold. It was about the systematic shutdown of body functions as core temperature dropped. First came the loss of fine motor control, making it difficult to maintain proper swimming technique. Then came the mental effects: confusion, poor judgment, loss of coordination. Finally, if exposure continued long enough, came unconsciousness and death. Sarah could feel these effects beginning to manifest as she treaded water in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Her hands were clumsy now, her kicks were becoming less powerful, and she had to concentrate to maintain her head position above the waterline. But more concerning was what she was seeing in her teammates. Johnson was starting to look glassy-eyed, his movements becoming mechanical and uncoordinated. Martinez was shivering violently, his body burning through energy reserves at an unsustainable rate just to maintain core temperature. And Thompson was in real trouble. His swimming technique, which had been solid during pool training, was breaking down completely in the cold water. His strokes were short and panicky, his body position was poor, and he was using far more energy than necessary just to stay afloat. Most concerning, he was starting to show signs of cold water-induced panic, the kind of psychological response that caused even experienced swimmers to drown in survivable conditions. Sarah made another decision that would define her Hell Week experience. Instead of focusing solely on her own survival, instead of conserving her energy for the challenges ahead, she positioned herself next to Thompson and began coaching him through the crisis. "Thompson," she said, her voice steady despite her own physical distress. "Look at me. Focus on my voice. You're okay. We're okay. Just keep your movements slow and controlled." Thompson's eyes found hers, and she could see the panic that was building behind them. Cold water had a way of stripping away all the mental preparation and training, reducing even the strongest people to their most primitive survival instincts. "I can't feel my hands," he said, his voice tight with stress. "I can't feel my feet. I don't think I can make it back to shore." "Yes, you can," Sarah replied firmly. "We're going to swim back together. I'm going to stay right next to you the whole way. Just follow my pace and stay calm." Around them, the other crew members were dealing with their own battles against the cold. Williams was trying to maintain leadership while his own body temperature dropped. Martinez was fighting to control his shivering enough to swim effectively. Johnson was operating on autopilot, his movements steady but showing signs of hypothermic confusion. "Time!" Davis's voice carried across the water from shore. "Return to beach." Sarah positioned herself directly next to Thompson as they began the swim back through the surf. She could see that his technique was still poor, that he was fighting the water rather than working with it. But more importantly, she could sense that his confidence was shot, that he was swimming like someone who expected to drown at any moment. "Stay with my pace," she told him as they approached the surf line. "Don't fight the waves. Let them carry you toward shore." The return trip through the surf was treacherous in ways the outbound swim hadn't been. Their bodies were now hypothermic, their reactions were slower, and their judgment was compromised. Waves that would have been manageable under normal conditions now posed serious risks of injury or drowning. Sarah timed their entry into the surf zone carefully, waiting for a lull between sets and then swimming hard toward shore. She could feel Thompson struggling beside her, could sense that he was using every ounce of willpower just to keep moving forward. A large wave caught them 50 yards from shore, lifting them up and then crashing down with enough force to drive them both underwater. Sarah felt herself tumbling in the white water, her body twisted and rolled by forces beyond her control. For a moment, she lost track of Thompson completely, her vision filled with bubbles and churning sand. She fought her way back to the surface and immediately looked around for her teammate. She spotted him 20 yards away, struggling to stay above water as another wave approached. His movements were weak now, uncoordinated, showing all the signs of someone whose body was shutting down from cold exposure. Sarah swam toward him as fast as her hypothermic body would allow, reaching him just as the next wave hit. She wrapped her arm around his chest and began swimming for both of them, using her remaining strength to keep them both moving toward shore. "I got you," she said, though she wasn't sure he could hear her over the sound of crashing waves. "We're almost there. Just stay with me." The final 50 yards were a blur of exhaustion, cold, and determination. Sarah's body was operating purely on muscle memory now, her conscious mind focused entirely on keeping both herself and Thompson moving toward the beach. She could feel her own strength failing, could sense that she was pushing her body beyond what was safe or sustainable. But she could also see the shore getting closer, could hear the voices of instructors and other candidates calling encouragement from the beach. Williams had already made it to shore and was standing in the surf, ready to help his crew members as they arrived. Sarah's feet finally touched sand, and she helped Thompson stand as they stumbled through the last few yards of surf. Both of them were shivering uncontrollably now, their bodies fighting to restore core temperature after the prolonged cold exposure. Davis was waiting on the beach with his stopwatch and evaluation forms, but his expression was different now. He was looking at Sarah with something that might have been respect, or at least acknowledgement that she had done something noteworthy. "Boat Crew 6, he announced. "All members accounted for. Good work bringing your teammate home, Chen. That's what we like to see. Sarah nodded but couldn't speak through her chattering teeth. Around her, the crew was dealing with their own recovery from the cold water exposure. But there was something different in their dynamic now. They had faced a real crisis together, had supported each other when support was literally the difference between success and failure. Thompson approached her as they walked toward the warming station, his own shivering beginning to subside as his body temperature slowly returned to normal. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I was in trouble out there. Real trouble. You didn't have to help me." Sarah looked at him, seeing something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Not just gratitude, but recognition. Recognition that she had put herself at risk for him, that she had prioritized crew success over individual safety, that she had demonstrated exactly the kind of selfless leadership that Navy SEALs were supposed to embody. "We're a crew," she replied simply. "We succeed together or we fail together." Thompson nodded, but his eyes suggested he understood the deeper implications of what had happened. She had saved his hell week, possibly his entire Bud-S experience, when she could have focused on her own survival instead. "I owe you one," he said. "Just pass the program," Sarah replied. "That's all the payback I need." The next 3 days blurred together into a continuous cycle of physical challenges, sleep deprivation, and psychological pressure. Boat Crew 6 carried logs until their shoulders bled. They completed obstacle courses in the dark while instructors screamed criticism and encouragement. They performed calisthenics on the beach while waves crashed over them, adding salt water to their existing misery. Through it all, Sarah found herself emerging as an unofficial leader within the crew, not through rank or authority, but through consistent performance and willingness to sacrifice for her teammates. When William started showing signs of severe fatigue, she helped him maintain his leadership role without undermining his authority. When Martinez injured his shoulder during log PT, she adjusted her position to carry extra weight without making it obvious. When Johnson began showing signs of the mental confusion that came with extreme sleep deprivation, she helped him stay focused and oriented. But it was her continued support of Thompson that created the most significant change in crew dynamics. The man who had initially seen her as a diversity hire, who had questioned her right to be at Bud-S, had become one of her strongest supporters. Not because of political correctness or social pressure, but because she had earned his respect through performance under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Thursday afternoon brought the evolution that would define not just Sarah's Hell Week, but her entire Bud's experience. The log race. Each boat crew would carry their log 2 miles along the beach, through the surf, across a series of obstacles, and back to the starting point. It was a test of teamwork, endurance, and mental toughness that combined every challenge they had faced during the previous 3 days. But this year, the instructors had added a special incentive. "The crew that wins this evolution gets 2 hours of sleep," Rodriguez announced as the crews lined up with their logs. "The crew that comes in last gets an extra hour of surf torture. Everyone else gets what they've been getting. No rest, no mercy, and no sympathy." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she heard the stakes. 2 hours of sleep sounded like a luxury beyond imagination after 3 days of continuous activity. But more importantly, avoiding last place could make the difference between completing Hell Week and ringing the bell. She looked around at her crew and could see the same determination in their eyes. Williams was exhausted but focused, his leadership instincts sharpened by the prospect of rewarding his team's efforts. Martinez was hurting but determined, his slight build working against him, but his mental toughness keeping him in the fight. Johnson was operating on pure willpower now, his usual analytical approach reduced to simple determination to keep moving forward. And Thompson was transformed. The man who had struggled in cold water just days earlier was now one of the strongest members of the crew, his natural competitiveness channeled into crew success rather than individual achievement. "Crews, lift your logs!" Boat Crew 6 positioned themselves along their 200-pound telephone pole and lifted it to their shoulders in perfect unison. The weight that had seemed crushing during their first week of training now felt manageable, not because it had gotten lighter, but because they had gotten stronger, both individually and as a team. "Ready, go!" The race began with all 6 crews moving together along the beach, their logs bouncing slightly with each coordinated step. Sarah settled into the rhythm immediately, her body finding the efficient stride that would carry her through the miles ahead. But this wasn't just about individual endurance anymore. This was about crew coordination, about 6 people moving as one unit while carrying a weight that would be impossible for any individual to manage alone. The first mile was relatively easy, all crews maintaining good pace and staying together. But as the evolution continued and fatigue began to accumulate, the differences in crew cohesion became apparent. Crew 2 began to struggle first, their coordination breaking down as individual members started working at different rhythms. The log began to bounce erratically, forcing them to adjust their grips constantly and waste energy on maintaining control rather than forward progress. Crew 4 lost their rhythm during the surf passage, spending precious minutes reorganizing their positions after being knocked around by waves. Their time lead evaporated as they fought to re-establish the teamwork that had carried them through the first portion of the race. But Boat Crew 6 was finding a rhythm that seemed to transcend their individual capabilities. Sarah could feel the log moving smoothly above their shoulders, could sense that they were working together with an efficiency that came from weeks of shared challenges and mutual support. More than that, she could feel something special happening. They weren't just carrying a log anymore. They were demonstrating the kind of seamless teamwork that defined elite military units, the ability to function as a single organism rather than a collection of individuals. As they approached the halfway point, Sarah realized they were in first place. It wasn't a huge lead, maybe 30 seconds ahead of the nearest crew, but they were setting the pace for the entire evolution. More importantly, they were maintaining that pace without appearing to struggle, their movements coordinated and efficient. Williams called out encouragement from the front of the crew. "Looking good, 6! Keep this rhythm! We got this!" Sarah could hear the confidence in his voice, could feel it spreading through the crew and affecting their performance. They weren't just surviving Hell Week anymore. They weren't just trying to avoid last place. They were competing to win, to prove that their crew was the best of the best. The obstacle portion of the course was where their teamwork truly shined. Each obstacle required them to maneuver the log through, over, or around barriers while maintaining their grip and coordination. Other crews struggled with the transitions, losing time as they figured out how to adjust their positions and work angles. But Boat Crew 6 moved through the obstacles like they had been practicing together for years. Sarah found herself anticipating her teammates' movements, adjusting her position and grip automatically to accommodate the changing requirements. Thompson's strength was perfectly complemented by Martinez's flexibility. Johnson's height was balanced by Robert's stability. They were no longer 6 individuals carrying a log. They were a crew, a unit, a team that functioned with the kind of precision that couldn't be taught or faked. As they started the final mile, Sarah looked around and realized they had extended their lead to almost a full minute. Other crews were starting to show signs of breakdown, their coordination deteriorating as fatigue and sleep deprivation took their toll. But Boat Crew 6 was getting stronger. It was a phenomenon Sarah had read about but never experienced personally. The point in endurance challenges where teamwork and mental toughness could overcome physical limitations, where a group of people could achieve something that none of them could accomplish individually. The final half mile was where the real test came. This was where crews either came together or fell apart, where the accumulated fatigue of Hell Week would either break their unity or forge it into something unbreakable. Sarah could feel her own energy reserves running low, could sense that her crew members were dealing with the same physical limitations. But she could also feel something else, a collective determination that seemed to draw strength from their shared commitment to each other. "Quarter mile," Williams called from the front. "We got this. Nobody breaks. Nobody quits. We finish strong." The other crews were falling back now, their times suffering as coordination broke down and individual limitations began to assert themselves. Sarah could hear the voices of instructors and other candidates cheering from the finish line, could sense the growing excitement as it became clear that Boat Crew 6 was going to win. But the real victory wasn't the race itself. The real victory was what had happened to them as a team. The transformation from 6 individuals trying to survive Bud S into a crew that could accomplish anything together. They crossed the finish line in first place by almost 2 minutes, their time setting a new course record that had stood for 12 years. But more importantly, they crossed as a team, all 6 members together, strong and unified and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Rodriguez was waiting at the finish line with his stopwatch and evaluation forms. But for the first time since Sarah had arrived at Bud S, he was actually smiling. "Boat Crew 6, he announced to the assembled candidates and instructors. "Time 23 minutes 47 seconds, course record. Outstanding performance under pressure. That's what Navy SEAL teamwork looks like." Sarah felt a surge of euphoria that had nothing to do with winning the race. They had done more than set a record. They had proven to themselves and everyone watching that they belonged here, that they had what it took to function as a team under the most challenging conditions imaginable. But the real satisfaction came from seeing the expressions on her teammates' faces. Williams looked proud, but not surprised, as if he had always known they were capable of this level of performance. Martinez was grinning despite his exhaustion, his slight frame having contributed to a record-setting performance through perfect teamwork. Johnson was nodding with satisfaction, his analytical mind already processing what they had accomplished together. Thompson was looking directly at her with an expression she had never seen before. Not just respect, but something approaching admiration. Recognition that she had been right from the beginning about what it meant to be part of a crew, about the importance of supporting each other rather than competing against each other. "Chen," he said quietly as they walked toward their 2-hour rest period. "I was wrong about you. From day one, I was wrong about why you were here and what you were trying to prove." Sarah looked at him, seeing a man who had fundamentally changed his perspective about women in combat, about teamwork, about what it meant to be a Navy SEAL. "You weren't wrong about everything," she replied. "I did come here to prove something. I just wanted to prove it through performance rather than politics." Thompson nodded. "Mission accomplished. You proved you belong here. But more than that, you proved that you make everyone around you better." That's what real leaders do. As Boat Crew 6 settled down for their first real rest in 3 days, Sarah reflected on everything that had brought her to this moment. The years of preparation, the skeptical reception when she first arrived, the gradual acceptance as she proved her capabilities, the team building that had transformed 6 individuals into something greater than the sum of their parts. She had broken a 12-year record, but that wasn't the real achievement. The real achievement was proving that excellence had no gender, that teamwork transcended individual differences, that the only thing that mattered in the end was competence, character, and commitment to the mission. Friday morning brought the final evolutions of Hell Week, but they felt different now. Boat Crew 6 moved through them with the confidence of a team that had already proven itself, that knew they could handle whatever challenges remained. When the final whistle sounded and Hell Week officially ended, 31 candidates remained from the original class of 52. 21 had rung the bell, unable to continue in the face of physical exhaustion, sleep deprivation, and psychological pressure. But Sarah Chen and the rest of Boat Crew 6 had not just survived. They had excelled. They had set a record that would stand as a testament to what properly functioning teams could accomplish when they committed to each other's success. As they stood in formation for the Hell Week completion ceremony, Sarah felt a satisfaction that went beyond personal achievement. She had proven that she belonged in the teams not because standards had been lowered for her, but because she had exceeded every standard that mattered. She had earned the respect of instructors who initially doubted her capabilities. She had gained the trust of teammates who had questioned her motivations. She had demonstrated the kind of leadership and teamwork that defined Navy SEAL culture at its best. But most importantly, she had proven to herself that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, with exactly the right people beside her. The program was far from over. Months of advanced training lay ahead, challenges that would test their skills in ways that Hell Week never could. But Sarah Chen was no longer the female candidate trying to prove herself worthy of acceptance. She was simply a Navy SEAL candidate, proven under fire, tested under pressure, and ready for whatever came next. And when her instructors looked at her now, when her teammates looked at her now, when she looked at herself in the mirror, they all saw the same thing. A warrior who had earned her place through blood, sweat, tears, and an unbreakable commitment to excellence. The record would stand for years to come, but the real victory was already complete.